Towards the computer. All right, I'll go from the top again. So, welcome everybody. Um, so in this session, we were hoping to spend some time sharing our enthusiasm for supervision and our different experiences of doing supervision training, in that I went an SF route and Janine didn't. So to kind of contrast those and talk about them a little bit, which might be of interest if you're thinking about doing supervision training. We wanted to talk about some of the differences between SF coaching and SF coaching supervision. This was very much a live discussion right the way through my training. And I came out with, I thought, some clarity around this, but it seemed an interesting point of debate. And we wanted to extend that opportunity out to this group. And we also want to give you an opportunity to play with how to stay solution focused when you're having supervision conversations with coaches coming from different trainings, using different models, and potentially using language that you don't fully understand because it's not part of how you operate. So we're going to give you an opportunity, probably from about halfway through, to have a play with some scenarios.
And we are looking at it as, coming from backgrounds, I suppose it's useful to say my background is predominantly coaching, organisational. And so I do look at this through that lens as a coach and coach trainer. And Abby, your background?
Some coaching and some therapy. The supervision work I'm doing is mostly in the coaching space, but I also do some solution-focused coaching supervision for some charities who are neither, charity staff who are neither coaches or therapists, they're wellbeing workers. And I've really appreciated the versatility of my training.
Yeah, whereas mine is predominantly with coaches, coaching supervision as well. And today we are going to explore, as Abby said, how we got here, the what and why of supervision, obviously what's so super about SF supervision, comparing that to coaches, and some case examples, and hopefully there will be a number of takeaways. And it is lovely to see so many of you here as well today. And we're curious to know what you're curious about. So please tell us, and in the chat or unmute yourselves, what are you curious about in relation to SF supervision? So in the chat, or put your unmute yourselves, and if anyone does want to put their cameras on and say hello, we'd love to see you.
We would love to.
We can see some people. We're very happy to see more. What are you curious about? Yeah, that's interesting, Cornelia, that coaching and supervision. It's a discussion to explore, absolutely. And you're considering training as a supervisor, Susanna. Okay, well, we will talk about that a little bit. What else are people curious about? Yeah, what do other people do? And Susanna, I'm thinking there, that's the signposting versus the questioning. So sharing information and keeping curious. What it could look like in practice, we'll share a few cases with you. And the quality control element. Do you mean as in the quality control if we have, if that's our role contextually?
Yeah, so I'm not coming through, am I?
You are now, yes.
Okay, you can't see me. I'm not sure why, but yeah, part of my role, certainly up until very recently, and I still do a bit, is to supervise coaches. They're not SF coaches. I just supervise coaches as part of my role, and I use an SF approach to do that. And one of the things that's perhaps a little bit different is, the whole part of traditionally supervision with coaching, something I've been doing for a long time, is a quality control element to it. So I was just curious as to what other people thought about that. And
Yeah, thanks. And you're asking a lot of the questions that we were asking, because one of the great things about this session is that Abby and I have got to chat a lot. We have worked together in the past as coaches for an organisation together, and we got to chat about these things. How to find a new supervisor. Yeah. And would supervision be the same as intervision? My understanding is intervision is often group supervision. Would that be right? Just give me a nod. And so we often talk about some of those simile as well.
Or it should flag that there are some amazing supervisors in this group, so you might want to think about who you'd like to network with after this session if you're looking for a supervisor. I've been supervised by at least 2 people in this room who are fabulous.
Yeah, likewise, actually, a shout out to those people as well. Yeah, how do we stay SF? Love that. And how to orient the session. Well, we'll do our best to accommodate your answers, and we'll assume that you will do your best too. And we'll cover all of this. And if there are questions, we're happy to stick around at the end and continue conversations with you too. So thank you for that. And we'll start with some of the questions you've had, and Abby alluded to you, is our routes to certification. And they were actually really quite different. So Abby, do you want to share a little bit about how come you decided to qualify as a supervisor and what struck you about that and your journey?
Absolutely. And I was rather pulled into supervision. I'm not sure that if I'd been left to myself, I would have necessarily felt ready. But I was starting doing some solution-focused training. And what I found was, having done training, was that people were asking me to be their supervisor. I had one particularly supportive colleague who said, I absolutely want you to supervise me, but if you won't do it without a certificate, will you please go and get one? Which was just the kind of shove I needed, I think. And that led me to kind of looking at what was the most rigorous solution-focused training I could find out there. It'd been about maybe 2 years since I'd done my advanced certificate with Brief. And I wanted to kind of go back and refresh and consolidate and learn supervision through that lens. And the Solutions Academy course was the longest course I could find that looked like it was going to cover all the bases. And I was really keen to make sure that I hadn't missed anything that I might then feel a sense of responsibility around, particularly to do with ethics and having those kind of conversations. So I ended up with the Solutions Academy doing a solution-focused course, and really have just carried on from there, moving into more and more kind of one-to-one and group work. What about you, Janine? What did you choose?
So I started supervising very similarly to you. So I've trained coaches in SF for years, and I'd done my ICF accreditation because I thought maybe I should be accredited after all this time. And having been steeped in solutions focus, say, for about 20 years, I started to think, well, what else is out there? And felt it was good to have a sense check. So I've been like hanging out with non-SF coaches quite a bit, seeing what they're doing. And when it came to being, I thought the same as you. I thought if I'm going to supervise, I should be accredited. And I looked around and I went for a universal accreditation, so ILM level 7, which is the equivalent to a master's. And for that, I spent 6 months listening, highly theoretical. And as an absolute diehard practitioner, it challenged me. I did write lots of assignments. And I learned a few things. I learned the theory. I learned that the field of supervision, there's writing about it, there could be more and varied culturally as well. And I got my qualification, which was hugely exciting. And what really struck me was that it was incredibly reassuring that what we do well as well. So quite a long journey. Even down to the fact that my assessment that I submitted, after having learned about psychodynamic supervision, that the person assessing it said I had ticked all the boxes, and it was as straightforward. It was an SF supervision session, but I ticked all the boxes for all the things that they were looking for. And I thought that was incredibly reassuring and reaffirming for us that our work is recognised in that way. Yeah.
I think I found myself in a similar place by the end of the course, that I got to train with some amazing and inspiring coaches with different backgrounds. But I really got to contrast what it was like to be supervised by people practicing in an SF way and in a non-SF way, which I'd kind of invited. You know, I really wanted to sample what it was like being on the receiving end of different styles. And one of the most vivid contrasts I think I had during that training course was someone who coached me from a Gestalt perspective, followed by someone else who coached me on the same issue from an SF perspective. And with one of those practice partners, I really constructed a problem around the thing I was bringing to supervision and left feeling very demotivated. And in the other session, I think I started acting on the thing that I was trying to accomplish, which was around my EMCC accreditation paperwork, within about an hour of finishing the session, which was a real kind of sign for me that there is something very pragmatic and powerful that we do when we have solution-focused conversations in supervision with people.
And we'll hear more about that. And one of the things I wanted to know is, what is supervision? I have been supervised. And also this question about, is it really different to coaching, which came up. So let's explore that. So if we think about what is supervision, and it was interesting when we looked at some of the definitions, and we've got a couple of definitions here that came from our research. And as we look at them, both of them are really saying that it's formal, and that it is developmental, and it has that element of quality assurance. And the nice point here about this interactive reflection, so it's between two people. And something Abby and I particularly both liked was this sharing of expertise. So we're in it together, and we're sharing expertise. And this is, you know, these authors are people who write, they are leading the way. You can see that these dates are 2005, 2006, and this is a lot of the literature that was offered as I was studying. And there are some things we perhaps might question, this interpretive evaluation and the desire to understand that are embedded within some of these definitions. So yeah, so the definitions. So if you have any thoughts, observations, or comments, please do let us know, or put them in the chat, or anything else to add in terms of definitions. And Abby, anything else from you that you're thinking about as you look at those definitions?
I don't think so. I think the same things stuck out for me, the kind of the danger, I suppose, of wasting time in supervision in a space of interpretation. And I was struck by the fact that kind of dropping in and out of some of the resources that I'd been accessing during my course, that I couldn't find a nice, pithy, solution-focused supervision definition to put up as a contrast.
That's right. These ones, Hawkins and Stevens, they are the ones that people are still talking about now. So there is room for that.
Yeah. I don't feel like we're noisy enough in the supervision space, us SF people.
Well, yeah, and there is time. I think it is time for it to be looked at, and it makes us think, start to think about, well, why should we have supervision for coaches? You know, because if you think about it, practitioners, it's part of a lot of people's roles. And a bit of research on this is that at the moment there are around 370,000 coaches, professionals. That's just registered on LinkedIn at the moment, and it's increasing every day. And that whilst there are professional bodies for coaching, ICF, EMCC, anyone can say that they're a coach. I'm sure you're all aware of this, but you can just put your sign up tomorrow and say, I'm a coach. And it is predominantly an unregulated profession. If you think about that, given the nature of the role and the impact and the conversations that we're having with people, it would seem essential that in some way there should be some supervision and check for the client, and also for the coach, thinking about what they're doing. So we can be, and coaches are not required in any way, shape or form to really be supervised to some extent. And there was a nice piece of research carried out that said only 50% of coaches undertake coaching supervision, and that it was ranked 5th as a method of self-reflection. So people said that just private reflection, reading a book, researching, peer networking were other ways that they did it, all very suitable, but they don't have that quality of a supervision element. And Abby and I were talking about this, is that now people coaching is, whilst you don't have to be accredited, that we're noticing more that if people want to work as an associate, that they're being asked more and more, are you accredited? And also I personally felt as a coach trainer that I should have an internationally recognized qualification, just as a credibility to say, you know, we're inviting you. And part of that accreditation is having supervision to maintain it. So Abby, tell us, in your view, what's so super about SF Supervision?
I have a feeling with this audience, I will be somewhat preaching to the choir, but having been on the receiving end of, sorry?
Preach away.
But having been on the receiving end of quite a lot of supervision and different types of supervision, I do think solution-focused supervision offers a really special space. I think that for supervision to be effective, and the opportunity it can be for the supervisee, that you need to feel really, really safe. You need to be safe about bringing your insecurities, about bringing things that you think went wrong, times when you didn't feel skillful, times when you were too involved and you got off track. And if you're working with someone who is taking a solution-focused stance, so they are always looking out for your resourcefulness, they're assured of your good intention, they're amplifying the things that you are doing well, I think it leads to that really, really safe space where you can be really honest about your practice. And then once you can be really honest with someone in that safe space, then you know you have this opportunity to explore what progress looks like and what skills you want to see emerging and what skills are showing up. And all of this in a really pragmatic and non-pathologizing way. I think all of this is great for developing practice. And, you know, if you're a coach here and you're not accessing supervision at the moment, I'd really encourage you to find someone to work with, because actually this is the most effective reflective growing that I do, is in supervision. And I also wanted to talk about what's great about being an SF supervisor. I love doing the supervision work that I'm now doing, and I was trying to think about all the reasons I really enjoy doing it. I think it's something to do with the client group. They tend to be very motivated, incredibly well-meaning, with strong reflective skills. I learn such a lot in every supervision conversation. And often from people who are working in a solution-focused way and people working from other models. I think when you're working with coaches, there's an opportunity to be a little bit experimental and creative in the approach you take, you know, within your contract and asking permission. There's something really beautiful about the part of this work, which is just witnessing other people's skills and the impact they're having and feeling like you're a part of that. That as a supervisor, we contribute to the sustainability of other people's work, their fitness for practice, their well-being, and we become part of that really beautiful ripple effect they have out into the world. So I think supervision work is a joy. I don't, Janine, what do you think?
I agree. And it's also the learning that comes from it. So, and also Kij, thanks for your contribution there as well. In the chat, as that supervision is encouragement, and that you're asking that best hopes and pleased to notice. And actually that leads us into our next point, this one about coaching and supervision, because we asked that in coaching, right? Best hopes, what have you been pleased to notice? These are questions that we ask in our coaching. So questions for you first, wise people. If we think about SF supervision and SF coaching, what in your view are the similarities between the two? And we've got some there already, best hopes, pleased to be noticing. what in your view are some of the similarities in the chat for us, or speak to us? So yeah, we would use scaling, absolutely, Jules, and use a lot of scaling in supervision. Really nice to invite people to rate sessions they've had, and how they feel it's gone from the different perspectives.
Yeah.
Yes, how did you manage to do that? So incredulity. Wow, how did you do that?
Jane
Yeah.
put that it's an isomorphic it's isomorphic, you know, they reflect each other. SF coaching and SF supervision, very similar questions, strategies, stance.
Yeah, and the mindset or stance, as we're saying, that we are looking for, hearing, noticing, and assuming progress and using their language. Yeah, so there's a number of similarities, and you know, and we could go with more. We do have some to share with you. Let's have a look at, in your view, what are some of the differences then that you perceive to be between SF coaching and SF supervision? If any, of course. Yeah, so it's very much, we've always got the client relationship in mind, Susanna. It's always about, or predominantly, actually, I won't say always, a lot of the time it's including the client. Yes, and we often bring cases. So we might bring recordings, we might bring written notes, and often there is that discussion on certain cases.
The client isn't the only expert. And I like that as a point, in that, you know, we're quite often chosen for our knowledge and expertise as supervisors.
I like your phrase there, though. The client isn't. I like that we're sharing expertise.
Yeah.
Well, and yes, ethical responsibility. We had a nod to that from Ian about the fact that often we have quality control. If you're an in-house supervisor, for example, or as I do, working on professional qualifications, there is a kind of duty of care and responsibility, and that often there is teaching. And I think Susanna's point, that's often attention, when to step in and when not to, because people come to supervision, and if they're looking for SF supervision, and particularly they know we're an SF practitioner, often there is that request, you know, what do you think, what can we do? Yes, and there are many levels, so thank you for that. And yes, there is the supervisee does give a direction. I actually send out to people that there's areas they might want to look at, so skill, cases, ethics, and some prompt questions for them, so that they might very well turn up with a list. And sometimes we need to educate people a little bit about what supervision is in advance, whereas coaching, people turn up and we a bit more, it's indirect, what do you want to talk about? So it does have a context and a room for what we are talking about. Yeah, Sarah, message me afterwards or stick around, can share anything that's useful to you. I've got it down to 1 page. I like short documents. So let's just share some of our thoughts, which absolutely are echoing yours. So let's start with some of those similarities.
Okay, similarities are very much around the stance, one of curiosity, respect, pragmatism, assumption of competence. As mentioned in the list, there's a kind of focus on coach development, which I put in as a similarity, actually, but probably thinking about people who I coach who are focused on professional development, and that we are always interested in amplifying resources and successes, what's gone well, what the progress is. I think I've got a quote on the next slide. Oh,
yeah, we've got differences. Oh, yes, we do have a quote.
We do have a quote. So we have an INSU quote.
Well remembered.
So Insoo made it clear that one should take a modest, humble stance as a supervisor and believe that the very word supervisor denotes a relationship between expert and non-expert and should be questioned. At the same time, she promoted the value of supervisory relationships that educate, mentor, nurture, and inspire. And as Jane said, she proposed an isomorphic relationship exists between solution building with clients and SF supervision, stating that the assumptions and the practices are the same.
Okay. And we think about some of these differences as well, that you've talked about this, actually we've covered most of these, is that it depends what your role is, that you may well be, the context is different. If you're in organisations, you might be looking out for people. How do we manage that? And a lot of that is in our contracting with our supervisees. What are we here for? What's the roles? What do we work with? There are teaching and meta discussions. I was running a session, I was doing a supervision session yesterday, and someone was wanting to work out how to not give advice. So we ran an entire session. I just asked her what she knew about that. And at the end I said, what did I do? What did you learn? And also, when have there been times where you've managed to do that, you know, because she was a facilitator. And that leads us to this point that is very SF, focusing on the do's. What do you do well? What can you do rather than what don't you do? And that in a lot of instances, we are referring to the client. The client is a very significant part of the system. We do share resources in the service of the clients and in the service of their clients. And we also, share expertise occasionally. And I think that's something we could have, sorry about this, there could be some really significant discussions here about when do we share and when don't we, and other supervisors contributing, but holding back as much as we can, and that making a call as to when it is time to share our view, our idea, or what works. But we do have a mandate to be able to do that. Does that resonate with other supervisors, that there are times when we share? Yeah, so I think that is very clear and very different to coaching, probably the one of the many significance. And ethics are a consideration here, that whether it's a code of ethics through the body that you belong to, that quite often people will turn up with an ethical question, and that we should at least be aware of and be supporting people with their ethics. So Abby, if you tell us about this.
Yeah, I'm going to give credit to Jane for putting me onto this really helpful paper. It's really easy to access. We put the link there. It's only about 9 pages long, but it's concerned with how you have ethical conversations with, or conversations about ethics with clients, and the kind of different approaches you might take to it. So the points on this slide are really the starting place. So what attitude are you going to go into your conversation with? How can I tread as softly as possible? What are my obligations? You know, this is related to your context and your responsibilities. How do you meet those and stay SF in as far as you can? And how do you create freedom for the coach to make decisions and choose, whilst kind of retaining the option to close off options if you need to, because there may be things you know about the ethical frameworks and issues that, say, coaches earlier on in their journey are not aware of, or you might have very specific responsibilities for the organisation that you work for. Frank Thomas uses these kind of 3 words, his 3 4s, for talking about the different approaches you might take: semaphore, metaphor, and 2x4. And semaphore is to do with the kind of really open conversations we might have with supervisees, where we flag lots of different options. You know, we're in the flow of a session, we might share some information, we might make a suggestion, we might ask some questions to kind of steer the conversation and exploration in a particular way. And our supervisee will show us that they've listened, but we don't know until they come back what they've understood and what they've chosen to move forward with. So that's like the most open. This kind of metaphor approach is a kind of indirect way of exploring a particular idea. So Frank talks about telling stories that suggest certain options. And again, you're trying to leave things open, but you are kind of sharing things from your own experience with a level of kind of ambiguity and non-directness, so that your supervisor can listen and take what's useful from the kind of anecdote you've offered. You know, it's that kind of, I don't know if this would be useful to you, but here's something from my experience kind of conversation. And then finally, the 2x4 approach. This is where you actually know something is the case in terms of ethical choices, and you might actually have to be very direct and say, actually, you know, if we look at your ethical guidelines, you're not able to share that information. That would be breaking confidentiality, or whatever it happened to be. So he gives this really nice kind of description of from wide to kind of indirect and metaphorical to absolutely direct. This is the way I see it, and this is what your responsibilities are in this situation.
Thank you. And so we've been looking at, you know, what is supervision, SF supervisions, coaching, etc. And one of your requests, and one of the things that we're also fascinated about, is seeing what people do, or hearing in this case, or even looking at what we might do when. And so that's what we're going to invite you to do now, is to look at some scenarios and share your thoughts on what you might do. And then obviously we'll share some of our thoughts too. And we have some cases here for you that you can see. I'm working with this person, they've got debts. These are things that the coach comes to you and says this. They come to supervision. I'm working with this person, they've got big debts. I think it's hopeless and it's a topic I'm struggling with personally. Scenario 2, I'm concerned I'm experiencing unhelpful transference. I think I'm feeling de-energized and stuck, because that's how my client is feeling. So we've had parallel processing, transference, and then we've got I was troubled by how distracted my client was in the last session. I know other coaches might challenge this, but I don't feel comfortable with this approach. So in a moment, we're going to invite you into a breakout room and allocate you a scenario to look at. So if you can see in the chat, you will see that those in rooms 1 and 4, I have given you scenario 1. Room 1 and 4, if you're there with Jane and Edward, that's room 1. If you're there with Kidge and Ian, that's room 4. It's just some names. There's about 4 or 5 of you in the rooms. Rooms 2 and 5, you're going to look at the other scenario, which is I'm concerned I'm experiencing, and that's with Gil, Deborah, and room 5 is Jules and Susan. And then if you are in rooms 3 and 6, that's if you are with Susanna's and with Magdalena and Wuzen and Kylie. And if you can't work out which one you're meant to be looking at, look at the one that's most interesting to you. But we're just giving you a prompt as things to do. Some of you haven't allocated to rooms yet, and I will do that in a minute when the rooms go. We'll give you about 7 or so minutes, and then we'll really hear what you did next, or what you would do next, and we'll also share what we'll do next. Everyone got a general idea about what they're doing in the breakout rooms? Give me a nod. Thank you. Okay, Sarah, that's great. You'll be listening in. I'm going to open the breakout rooms now. Okay. We welcome you back and hope you had fruitful, interesting, and insightful chats. Hopefully about supervision, but whatever will be useful as well. And we're very keen to hear from you. So our first scenario, which was I'm working with this person. Let me share my screen. I'm working with this person. They have big debts. I think it's hopeless, and it's a topic I struggle with personally. Groups 1 and 4, rooms 1 and 4. Tentatively, we're looking at that. Let's hear from room 1. What's one thing you decided next? What were let's hear one thought or idea from you.
I can share.
Yeah.
Our first question is, what does this person want from supervision? Because they might be saying, I don't want my stuff to be getting in the way with this client. How do I do that, and how do I stay on, purely listening to coach? Or they might be like, this is just triggering me too much, and I'm too overwhelmed, and I need to finish. So it totally depends what the supervisee wants from the supervision.
So we might ask that question. So tell me, what
Yep.
do you want from the super? That's really nice. Let's sidestep that. Just what do you want from the supervision? Classic and really nice way to start it. Kij, Catherine, Ian, among Glen, you had that one as well. What else did you have for us?
My fault. We did the wrong one.
Ah,
That's
brilliant.
all right. We focused on, what was it, number?
Sorry.
Another one. Was it number
I did
3?
say,
Anyway.
I did say focus on whichever is the most interesting to you. So you obviously
we
did
focused
that.
on 2.
Brilliant. Well, other thoughts from other people as well. We've got this. So what do you want from supervision? Really nice. What else?
Also in group 1, we talked about the person is being pulled into giving advice.
Yeah.
And of course, the problem with being pulled into giving advice, if you're struggling with that subject yourself, is that you're going to be stuck because you haven't got any advice because you're being pulled through the mill for it. So that's the problem about giving advice, is that you've got to be on top of the subject. You've got to be an expert. You're a mentor, not a coach. So it's best not to want to do that in the first place.
Ah, interesting. And actually, a little bit of information I didn't share about this case is that the person I was supervising, this is one of mine, was a financial coach. So we make you worry a bit, that they were in a position to advise, and they decided it was hopeless and that they couldn't give advice. So, and equally, I heard that and I thought, oh my God, I had all this finance stuff. So it was really, really fascinating. So it was quite an interesting context as well. And let's see some of these things. So, I mean, it was acknowledge it. That sounds tricky. And I went for the how would you like to be handling it instead? Okay, how would you like to be handling this situation instead? And she said, I'd like to be impartial, maintain a stance, leave my stuff at the door. So this is a coach who knew what they were doing and also had the wisdom to notice. No surprises really now, what was in there. And here's a couple of things in your coaching in life. Where have you managed to keep impartiality? So, and equally, suppose you manage to take that stance in your next session, how would you know? So, and something that's really nice about SF Supervision, I find, is we do a lot more how would you know and supposing than analysing what is that other approaches might take. So that how would you know you are having a good session? So thank you very much. Those of you that looked at scenario 2, I have a feeling it might be room 2, but it might not. If you looked at room 2, Abby, over to you. So we're going to look at scenario 2.
Yeah, do just speak out if you did this one. I can't actually see everybody, so it's much easier for me if you just kind of unmute yourself and tell us where you would have gone with this scenario.
Jules and Gil have just unmuted. So
well,
yeah.
Jules, you were taking good notes.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at the question again. So Jacqueline pointed out we'd start with how would you know if the session was going to be useful to you? How would you know? What are your hopes from this session? So we started with that. And if their hopes were so they say they're feeling de-energized and stuck. So say their hope was that they're hoping not to feel so stuck. We talked about exceptions, exploring the exceptions when they've had a client who has had low energy and they've managed to keep feeling the way that responding the way they want to. But we also talked about imagining a session where their hopes are happening in relation to how they'd like to respond as a coach and they'd like to manage it. And even before they start the session, what might be happening, what preparation would be taking place, so that so that they can be the best version of themselves as a coach. So it's about what their hopes are, the kind of version of themselves they want to be in that scenario, and then perhaps imagining it. And Gail, you talk about scaling as well, weren't you? And using scaling to help with that. Do you want to say something about that?
Well, I thought, I mean, my thing was the supervisee was, if they're feeling stuck, and they use the term transference, and we just stayed away from using that term and framed it as feeling stuck, hoping that would be their language for that. And then scale feeling stuck, with 10 being completely unstuck, and 0 is being completely stuck. But I think, Deborah, you had another idea for scaling, didn't you?
So Mike, if we were focusing on the de-energized and stuck, I would probably ask something like what they would want instead. How would they want to feel, get explained, and then that would be the 10. And then where are they, and how do they work towards the 10? So explore it that way. Yeah.
Thank you. We've got some, some classic solution focused moves there, and very much the approach that I took. This was actually one of my clients, and I did exactly what Gil suggested. I sidestepped the transference word and went straight for that. And how would you like it to be? At which point I got this from my client, that she didn't want to be weirdly coachy and separate. She was actually a really wonderful creative coach, and she stood and she paused at this point and did me a wonderful drawing and showed me, I want to feel connected, but not inside his maelstrom, to be in my own sunshine. And then we have our kind of positive direction to move into. So what helps you stay in your sunshine? And then, it's a new skill, something about being able to zoom out. And then I moved into discussion about how she was developing that skill. So very much as you did, kind of sidestep the transference and find the solution focused direction of travel, and that kind of resourceful strategies and past.
And in the interest of time for scenario through group, the group that did look at that, if you could put it in the chat as we share what actually unfolded, I hope that's okay, or just give us a thumbs up at the end, or tell us if you came up with something different. So we'll just run through scenario 3, Abby.
Yeah, another client of mine, so troubled by how distracted her client was, and I don't feel comfortable with this challenging approach. And I asked, if she was to challenge in a way that felt right to her, what would she notice? And at that point, she actually moved straight out of that space and said, oh, actually, I've had some recommendations that say that I am challenging. But her challenge tended to be an encouraging kind of challenge, which is, one of those lovely examples of the fact that we don't always mean the same things with the same language. And I asked her, with this client, what kind of challenge did she suppose might be helpful? And she said, maybe just an open, curious comment, maybe I notice you're distracted today. At which point I asked, and what might that have made to have opened that discussion with him? And the conversation went on from there. Might have gained an understanding about why he was distracted rather than just being irritated by it. And we ended with talking about how she might practice getting better at that kind of direct, open, curious questioning over the coming week. And she was able to think about some people that she wanted to start taking that approach with.
It's really nice. Group was thumbs up, if similar, different, the group that looked at that? Yeah, that's you can't answer that question any other way, I should say. But we hope that is interesting and useful to see some of those cases. Thanks very much for your thoughts and discussions around it too. And today, really a whistle-stop tour of supervision, this idea of what is it, how's it relatable, different to coaching, taking it from an SF stance and sharing some ideas across our wise group today, because we know that you bring a lot of wisdom to the session as well. So really, we would like to say thank you. We're here for a few minutes afterwards if anyone does want to stick around, and we always love to hear and happy for you to share takeaways from our time together. So if you would like to put them in the chat, say something, that's absolutely fine. Also appreciate you might be rushing off to another super session that will be coming up next. So from me, I'm going to say, oh, thank you. And that's us. And over to you, Abby, to finish us.
Yes, thank you so much for participating. And I think we could have spent the whole hour on those scenario discussions. I wish we'd had more time to hear everybody's different thoughts. But yes, thank you very much for participating. Lots of lovely thank yous in the chat. Much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks, people. Anyone wants any information, can they email me? Perhaps I'm away for the next week, but
I'm here. I can, if there's anything else, yeah.
And do get in touch with us if it's something you're interested to as well. We wish you luck on your supervision journeys, those of you that are embarking on them as well. And thank those of you that have helped us on ours.
Thank you. Yes.